The courtroom door creaked open at exactly 2:47 p.m., and David Parker felt his entire world stop spinning. There she was, Simone, the woman he'd spent 2 years telling she was broken, that her body had failed them both. The woman he'd watched cry herself to sleep month after month when the pregnancy tests came back negative. The woman he'd finally given up on, filing for divorce with bitter words about wanting a real family with someone who could actually give him children. But the Simone walking into Judge Holmes' courtroom wasn't the broken woman he'd left behind 6 months ago. This Simone glowed with a radiance that took his breath away, her dark skin luminous under the fluorescent lights. Her natural hair was styled in elegant locks that framed her face beautifully. She wore a flowing navy dress that did nothing to hide the unmistakable curve of her pregnant belly. 7 months pregnant. Maybe 8. David's mouth went dry. His hands started shaking as he gripped the edge of the defendant's table. The papers in front of him, the divorce decree he'd been so eager to sign, suddenly felt like they weighed 1,000 pounds. Mr. Parker? His lawyer, a thin white man in an expensive suit, was saying something, but David couldn't hear him over the rushing in his ears. Mr. Parker, are you all right? Across the aisle, Simone took her seat next to her attorney, a fierce-looking Latina woman David vaguely remembered as Carmen, Simone's college roommate. Simone's movements were graceful, deliberate. She placed one protective hand on her belly as she settled into her chair, and David felt something crack inside his chest. She looked happy. Actually, genuinely happy in a way he hadn't seen in years. Judge Patricia Holmes, a distinguished African-American woman with silver-streaked hair and knowing eyes, looked between the two parties. Before we proceed with today's divorce proceedings, I want to ensure both parties are present and ready to move forward. Mrs. Parker? Yes, Your Honor, Simone said, her voice clear and strong. She didn't even glance in David's direction. Mr. Parker? David tried to speak, but no sound came out. He cleared his throat and tried again. Your Honor, Judge Holmes raised an eyebrow. She'd been on the bench for 15 years and had seen every kind of courtroom drama imaginable. But even she seemed taken aback by the thick tension filling the room. Take your time, Mr. Parker. David's mind raced back to their last conversation, 6 months ago in their empty apartment. He'd been cruel, deliberately cruel. Face it, Simone, he'd said, throwing clothes into a suitcase. You're barren. I can't waste my life waiting for something that's never going to happen. I want kids, real kids, and you can't give them to me. She'd stood there in their bedroom doorway, tears streaming down her beautiful face, her hands unconsciously covering her abdomen. David, please. The doctor said it might just take time. We can try fertility treatments, we can... I'm done trying, he'd cut her off. I'm done pretending this is going to work out. I'm filing for divorce and I'm going to find someone who can actually be a mother. The words had been designed to destroy her, and they had. Simone had crumpled to the floor right there in their bedroom, sobbing so hard she could barely breathe. And David had stepped over her and walked out. Now, looking at her radiant face and the obvious swell of new life growing inside her, David felt like he was going to be sick. Your Honor, Carmen spoke up, her voice professional but with an edge of steel. My client is ready to proceed with the divorce as planned. The terms have been agreed upon by both parties. Judge Holmes nodded slowly, but her eyes remained fixed on David. Mr. Parker, you seem distressed. Do you need a moment? The courtroom was completely silent except for the hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic outside. David could feel everyone's eyes on him. The court reporter, the bailiff, the few other people waiting for their cases to be called. But most of all, he could feel the weight of Simone's presence, even though she still hadn't looked at him. David started again, then stopped. What could he possibly say? That he'd made the biggest mistake of his life? That seeing her pregnant proved everything he'd said about her was wrong? That he'd destroyed their marriage and her heart based on his own impatience and cruelty? Simone finally turned to look at him, and David's breath caught. Her dark eyes, once so full of pain and self-doubt, now held something he'd never seen before, complete and total peace. She looked at him like he was a stranger, someone she'd once known but had moved far beyond. Your Honor, Simone said quietly, I'd like to proceed with the divorce. I have important things to do with my life. She placed both hands on her belly, and David watched as the baby kicked, making her smile the most beautiful smile he'd ever seen. It was a smile that used to be for him, in the early days of their marriage when they dreamed together about the family they'd build. Judge Holmes looked between them one more time, then picked up her gavel. Very well. Let's proceed. But as the judge began speaking about the dissolution of their marriage, All David could think about was the wedding day 4 years ago when Simone had walked down the aisle toward him, glowing with joy and hope. She'd whispered to him at the altar, "I can't wait to make you a father someday." Now she was going to make someone else a father. Someone who clearly valued what David had thrown away. The irony was choking him. 8 months earlier, Simone Parker stared at the white stick in her trembling hands, the single line mocking her once again. Negative. Just like the previous month and the month before that and every month for the past 18 months since they'd started trying for a baby. She sat on the bathroom floor of their one-bedroom apartment in Atlanta's sweet Auburn district, her back against the cool tile wall. Through the thin bathroom door, she could hear David moving around in the kitchen, probably making his morning coffee and checking his phone for work emails. He'd stopped asking about the pregnancy tests months ago. The bathroom window let in the soft morning light, illuminating the small collection of negative pregnancy tests she'd saved in a shoebox, evidence of her body's repeated failures. 18 negative tests. 18 months of hope followed by crushing disappointment. At first, David had been supportive. He'd held her when she cried, brought her favorite ice cream, reminded her that it could take time. "We're young," he'd said 6 months in. "It'll happen when it's supposed to happen." But as the months dragged on, his patience wore thin. The sex became scheduled and clinical. The conversations about baby names and nursery colors stopped. David started working later, coming home after Simone had already fallen asleep. "Simone." David's voice came through the door. "You okay in there?" She wiped her eyes quickly and stood up. At 28, Simone was a successful graphic designer who'd built her freelance business from nothing. She was strong, independent, creative. But when it came to getting pregnant, she felt like a complete failure. "I'm fine," she called back, her voice steadier than she felt. She opened the door to find David standing there with his coffee mug, already dressed for work in his standard accountant uniform, pressed khakis and a button-down shirt. He was handsome in a clean-cut way with light brown skin and close-cropped hair. They'd met at a friend's barbecue 3 years ago, and Simone had been drawn to his stability, his 5-year plan, his certainty about what he wanted in life. What he wanted was a family. What she apparently couldn't give him. "So?" David asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Simone held up the test. "Negative." David's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Okay. Well, maybe this month." "Maybe," Simone echoed, but she could hear the doubt in her own voice. David checked his watch. "I have to get to work. That Johnson account needs to be finished by 5. He kissed her forehead quickly, a perfunctory gesture that used to mean so much more. "We'll talk later." After he left, Simone sat at her kitchen table with her laptop, trying to focus on designing a logo for a local bakery. But her mind kept wandering to the conversation she'd had with her mother, Ruth, the night before. "Baby girl," Ruth had said over the phone from her home in Savannah, "maybe you should see a specialist. There are doctors who can help with this sort of thing." "David doesn't want to spend the money on tests and treatments," Simone had replied. "He says if it's meant to happen, it'll happen naturally." "And what do you want?" Ruth had asked pointedly. That was the question Simone couldn't answer. She wanted a baby desperately, had wanted one since she was a little girl playing with dolls. But she also wanted her husband to want to fight for their dream together, not just wait passively for a miracle. Around noon, her phone buzzed with a text from her best friend Carmen. "Coffee? You sound like you need it." An hour later, Simone was sitting across from Carmen at a small cafe in Little 5 Points, watching her friend's worried expression grow deeper with each detail she shared. "Girl, you know I love you," Carmen said finally, "but this isn't healthy. You're blaming yourself for something that might not even be about you." Carmen Rodriguez had been Simone's roommate at Spelman College, and now she was a family law attorney with her own practice. She was fierce and protective, especially when it came to Simone. "What do you mean?" Simone asked. "I mean David hasn't been tested either, has he? Male factor infertility accounts for about 40% of fertility issues, but somehow you're carrying all the blame and shame." Simone stirred her latte absently. "He says his family has never had problems having kids. That's not how biology works, and you know it." Carmen leaned forward. "When was the last time David made you feel beautiful? When was the last time he talked about your future together in a positive way?" The questions hit too close to home. Simone couldn't remember the last time David had complimented her, or suggested a date night, or even really looked at her when they talked. "He's just stressed," Simone said weakly. "We're all stressed, honey. That doesn't give him license to make you feel like less of a woman." That evening, Simone tried to bring up the idea of seeing a fertility specialist, But David shut down the conversation immediately. I told you, Simone, I'm not interested in turning this into some medical circus. If God wants us to have kids, we'll have kids. But what if there's something simple that could help us? What if you just relaxed and stopped obsessing over this? David's voice was sharp, cutting. Maybe that's the real problem. You're so wound up about getting pregnant that your body can't do what it's supposed to do naturally. The word stung like a physical slap. Simone felt tears spring to her eyes, but she blinked them back. That's not how it works, David. Stress doesn't cause infertility. Are you sure about that? Because you've been a nervous wreck for months, taking your temperature every morning, tracking ovulation like it's a military operation. Maybe if you just acted normal, things would happen normally. Simone stared at her husband across their small dining table. When had he become so cold? When had he started looking at her like she was a problem to be solved rather than the woman he'd promised to love and cherish? I want us to see a doctor, she said quietly but firmly. Both of us. Together. David's expression hardened. I'm not wasting money on tests that are going to tell us what we already know, that we just need to keep trying. And what if the tests tell us something different? What if they tell us there's hope? There's always hope, Simone. But I'm not going to let you turn our marriage into a medical procedure. That night, they went to bed in silence. David fell asleep quickly, but Simone lay awake staring at the ceiling, feeling more alone than she'd ever felt in her life. She thought about the early days of their relationship, when David used to trace patterns on her stomach and whisper about all the babies they'd have someday. I bet they'll have your eyes, he'd say, and your creative spirit. Now he barely touched her except when they were trying to conceive, and even then it felt mechanical, joyless. Simone pulled out her phone and did something she'd been resisting for months. She Googled fertility doctors in Atlanta and made a list of specialists who took their insurance. Tomorrow she decided she would make an appointment. With or without David. She was going to fight for her dreams, even if she had to fight alone. 6 months earlier. Dr. Angela Washington's office was warm and welcoming, with soft lighting and photographs of smiling families covering the walls. Evidence of her success as one of Atlanta's top fertility specialists. Simone sat in the comfortable chair across from the doctor's desk, trying to calm her racing heart. Thank you for coming in alone, Mrs. Parker, Dr. Washington said, her voice kind but professional. She was an elegant black woman in her 50s, with graying locks pulled back in a sophisticated bun. I know it can be difficult when partners aren't on the same page about testing. Simone had called and made the appointment 3 weeks ago, hoping David would change his mind and come with her. But when she'd mentioned it again, he'd exploded. I told you I don't want to do this medical stuff, Simone. Why can't you just trust that things will work out naturally? Because they haven't worked out naturally, she'd replied. It's been 20 months, David. 20 months of disappointment. I need to know if there's something wrong that we can fix. There's nothing wrong with me, he'd said, his voice cold and final. If you want to go poke and prod yourself, that's your business. But leave me out of it. Now, sitting across from Dr. Washington, Simone felt both relieved and heartbroken. Relieved to finally be taking action, heartbroken that she was taking it alone. Let's start with your history, Dr. Washington said gently. How long have you been trying to conceive? 20 months, Simone replied. We started trying right after our first wedding anniversary. And your cycles are regular? Yes, 28 days like clockwork. I track everything, temperature, ovulation, timing. I've done everything the internet says to do. Dr. Washington smiled. The internet can be both helpful and overwhelming. Let's focus on the medical facts. Have you had any pregnancies before? No, never. Any history of pelvic inflammatory disease, endometriosis, or other reproductive health issues? Not that I know of. I've always had normal pap smears and annual exams. Dr. Washington made notes in Simone's file. What about your partner? Any children from previous relationships? Any known issues? No children. And he refuses to be tested. Simone's voice caught slightly. He says if God wants us to have children, it will happen naturally. I understand. Unfortunately, that's not uncommon. Many men are reluctant to acknowledge that fertility issues affect both partners equally. Dr. Washington leaned forward slightly. But I want you to know that whatever we find, there are options. Modern reproductive medicine has come a long way. Over the next hour, Dr. Washington explained the various tests they would run. Blood work to check hormone levels, an ultrasound to examine Simone's reproductive organs, a procedure to check if her fallopian tubes were clear. It was thorough and scientific, everything David had dismissed as unnecessary. I want you to know, Dr. Washington said as they wrapped up, that based on what you've told me, there's no obvious reason why you shouldn't be able to conceive. Sometimes it really is just a matter of timing and patience. But if there is an underlying issue, we'll find it and address it. Simone felt the first spark of hope she'd experienced in months. So there's a chance everything is fine? There's definitely a chance. And even if we find something, most fertility issues are very treatable these days. Walking out of the clinic, Simone felt lighter than she had in ages. She had a plan, a path forward. For the first time in months, she felt like she wasn't just waiting helplessly for her body to do something it seemed incapable of doing. She decided to stop by David's office and share the good news. Maybe if she explained how encouraging Dr. Washington had been, he'd change his mind about the whole process. David worked for a mid-sized accounting firm in downtown Atlanta. Simone had visited only a few times, but she knew his assistant, Mrs. Chen, who always remembered her name and asked about her design work. "Simone, how nice to see you," Mrs. Chen said warmly. "David's just finishing up a call. You can go right in." Simone knocked on David's office door and opened it with a smile. Surprise. David looked up from his computer with an expression that wasn't quite annoyance, but wasn't pleasure either. "What are you doing here?" "I wanted to tell you about my appointment with Dr. Washington. It went really well and I thought you'd want to hear." "I told you I didn't want to be part of this," David interrupted. "I don't want to hear about tests and procedures and all that stuff." Simone's smile faded. She'd expected some resistance, but not this cold dismissal. "David, she thinks there's a good chance everything is fine. She just wants to run some basic tests to make sure." "Simone, stop." David's voice was harsh enough that she took a step back. "I don't want to hear it. You're obsessing over this and it's not healthy. I'm trying to find answers so we can have the family we both want." "The family I want," David said slowly, "is one that happens naturally, not one we have to beg for from doctors." The words hung in the air between them like a physical barrier. Simone felt something fundamental shift in her chest, a cold realization settling in. "So if the tests show there's a problem we can easily fix, you wouldn't want to fix it?" "I want a wife who can get pregnant without medical intervention." The sentence was like a knife to her heart. Not, "I want us to have a baby." Not, "I want to try everything possible." He wanted a different wife. A wife who could give him what Simone apparently couldn't. "I see," Simone said quietly. "Do you? Because I don't think you do. I think you're so caught up in this fertility stuff that you've forgotten how to just be my wife." Simone looked around David's office, at the framed photo of them from their wedding day on his desk, at the motivational posters about success and achievement on the walls, at the window overlooking the busy Atlanta street below. Everything looked the same as it always had, but somehow it all felt different now. "What does being your wife mean exactly?" she asked. "It means trusting that things will work out. It means not turning every conversation into a discussion about ovulation schedules and doctor's appointments. It means being the woman I married, not this anxious version of yourself." Simone felt tears threatening, but she refused to cry in David's office. She'd done enough crying over their fertility struggles. She was tired of being made to feel like her desire for answers was somehow wrong or obsessive. "I'm going to continue with the testing," she said calmly. "Dr. Washington thinks we can get some answers quickly." David's expression hardened. "Then you're going to do it without my support." "I guess I am." The drive home felt longer than usual. Simone found herself taking a detour through the neighborhood where she'd grown up, past the small house where her mother Ruth had raised her as a single parent after Simone's father left when she was 5. Ruth had always told Simone that she was strong enough to handle whatever life threw at her. "You're made of tougher stuff than you realize, baby girl," she'd say whenever Simone faced challenges. Maybe it was time to remember just how tough she really was. That evening, David came home later than usual and barely spoke during dinner. They sat at their small kitchen table eating takeout Chinese food in silence, the space between them feeling like an ocean. "The testing will take about 2 weeks, Simone said finally. "Then we'll know one way or the other." David didn't look up from his lo mein. "We already know, Simone. We know that some things aren't meant to be forced. And we also know that some things aren't meant to be given up on without a fight." That night, they slept on opposite sides of their bed, each turned away from the other. But for the first time in months, Simone fell asleep feeling like she was taking control of her life rather than being victimized by it. 2 weeks later, Dr. Washington called with the results. "Everything looks perfect, Simone," she said, her voice warm with genuine happiness. "Your hormone levels are excellent, your ovaries are healthy, your tubes are clear. There's no medical reason why you shouldn't be able to conceive naturally." So why hasn't it happened? Simone asked. Sometimes it really is just timing. But I'd strongly recommend that your husband come in for testing too. Male factor infertility is involved in about half of all cases, and the testing is much simpler for men than what you've been through. That evening, Simone shared the good news with David, expecting him to be relieved and maybe even willing to consider his own testing. Instead, he looked at her like she'd proven his point. See? I told you there was nothing wrong. All this stress and worry for nothing. But Dr. Washington says you should be tested too, just to be thorough. Absolutely not. You got your clean bill of health. That should be enough. That night, as Simone lay awake listening to David's steady breathing beside her, she realized that somewhere along the way, their marriage had become less about love and support and more about who was right and who was wrong. And she was starting to suspect that both of them were wrong, just in very different ways. 4 months earlier, the invitation arrived on a Tuesday morning in March, mixed in with the usual bills and promotional flyers. Cream-colored cardstock with elegant gold lettering. Jessica and Michael Thompson request the pleasure of your company at the baptism of their daughter, Grace Elizabeth Thompson. Simone stared at the invitation, her coffee growing cold in her hands. Jessica had been her college roommate at Spelman before Carmen, and they'd stayed loosely in touch over the years. Jessica had gotten married a month before Simone, and had announced her pregnancy just 6 months ago. A surprise pregnancy that happened immediately after they started trying. Everything okay? David asked, glancing over her shoulder as he grabbed his work bag. Jessica had her baby. They're having a baptism next month. David's face tightened almost imperceptibly. Baby-related events had become landmines in their marriage, occasions they either avoided entirely or endured with forced smiles and early exits. Do you want to go? He asked, his tone carefully neutral. I don't know. Maybe. Simone set the invitation on the kitchen counter. It would be nice to see Jessica again. Well, let me know. I'll need to check my calendar. After David left for work, Simone found herself staring at the invitation for a long time. There had been a time when she would have been genuinely excited about celebrating a friend's new baby. She would have gone shopping for the perfect gift, would have looked forward to holding the tiny infant and imagining her own future children. Now the thought of attending a baptism felt like torture. Her phone buzzed with a text from Carmen. Coffee date? I have news. They met at their usual spot in Little 5 Points, and Simone could tell immediately that Carmen was practically vibrating with excitement. Okay, what's the news? Simone asked as they settled into their favorite corner table. Miguel proposed. Carmen held up her left hand, showing off a beautiful vintage emerald ring. Last night at that little Italian place in Virginia Highland. He got down on one knee right there by our table and I just started crying like a baby. Simone felt a rush of genuine joy for her best friend, followed immediately by a stab of something darker. Not jealousy exactly, but a kind of grief for the happiness that seemed to come so easily to everyone else. Carmen, that's amazing. I'm so happy for you. Simone reached across the table to hug her friend. Tell me everything. As Carmen launched into the story of the proposal, Simone tried to focus on her friend's happiness. But part of her mind kept drifting to her own marriage, to the growing distance between her and David, to the way their conversations had become minefield of topics they couldn't discuss without fighting. So we're thinking about a fall wedding, Carmen was saying. Nothing too big, just family and close friends. And of course I want you to be my maid of honor. I would be honored, Simone said, meaning it. Fall weddings are beautiful. And who knows? Carmen grinned. Maybe by then you'll have some good news of your own to share. Simone's smile faltered slightly. Maybe. Carmen's expression grew more serious. How are things going with the fertility stuff? Did David ever change his mind about getting tested? No. And honestly, I'm starting to think this whole thing is bigger than just fertility issues. Simone stirred her latte absently. It's like we can't talk about anything anymore without it turning into an argument. What do you mean? Last week I suggested we take a long weekend trip somewhere, just to reconnect and have some fun together. You know what he said? What's the point of planning romantic getaways when you're just going to be disappointed every month anyway? Carmen's eyebrows shot up. He said that. Those exact words. Like my disappointment about not getting pregnant is somehow ruining his life. That's. Carmen paused, choosing her words carefully. That's not how a loving partner responds to someone who's struggling. I know. And the thing is, I don't even know if I want to have a baby with him anymore. Not the way he's been acting. Simone's voice dropped to almost a whisper. Is that terrible to say? It's honest. And no, it's not terrible. A baby should be something that brings a couple closer together, not something that tears them apart. That afternoon, Simone walked around Piedmont Park trying to clear her head. She watched families playing on the playground, couples walking their dogs, teenagers throwing frisbees. Everyone else seemed to be living their lives with such ease, such joy. When had her life become so heavy? She called her mother as she walked. "Hey baby girl," Ruth's warm voice came through the phone. "How are you doing?" Simone paused. She'd been protecting her mother from the worst details of her marital struggles, not wanting to worry her. But suddenly she felt desperate for someone to understand what she was going through. "Mama, I think my marriage might be in trouble." There was a long pause. "You want to talk about it?" "David and we can't seem to connect anymore. Everything revolves around getting pregnant, but he won't do anything to actually help the situation. And when I try to take action on my own, he acts like I'm betraying him somehow." "That sounds lonely, honey." The simple statement hit Simone like a punch to the chest. "It is lonely. I feel so alone even when we're in the same room. What do you need right now? What would help you feel better?" Simone stopped walking and sat down on a park bench. "I need to feel like my husband is on my side. Like we're a team. But instead it feels like we're opponents in some game I didn't know we were playing." "Have you tried counseling?" "I mentioned it once. David said therapists just try to find problems where there aren't any." Ruth was quiet for a moment. "Simone, I need to ask you something, and I want you to really think about the answer." "Okay. If David never changed, if things stayed exactly like they are right now, could you be happy?" The question hung in the air. Simone watched a young couple pushing their toddler on the swings, laughing as the little girl squealed with delight. "No," she said quietly. "I don't think I could." "Then you have some decisions to make, baby girl." That evening, David came home in an unusually good mood. "Hey babe," he said, kissing her cheek. "Good day?" "It was fine. Carmen got engaged." "That's great. Miguel's a good guy." David loosened his tie and sat down next to her on the couch. "So I was thinking maybe we could try that new restaurant this weekend. The one with the good reviews." For a moment, Simone felt a flicker of hope. Maybe they could reconnect. Maybe this rough patch was temporary. "That sounds nice," she said. "And who knows?" David grinned and put his hand on her thigh. "Maybe a romantic dinner will help with other things." The hope flickered out immediately. Even his gestures of romance were tied to their fertility struggles, as if the only value she had was her potential to get pregnant. "David," she said carefully, "can I ask you something?" "Sure." "If we found out tomorrow that we could never have biological children, would you still want to be married to me?" David's expression shifted, becoming guarded. "Why would you ask something like that?" "Because I need to know. If the only reason you want to stay married is to have kids, then we have bigger problems than fertility." That's not a fair question, Simone." "Why isn't it fair?" "Because we're going to have kids. You're just borrowing trouble by thinking about worst-case scenarios. I'm trying to understand if you love me for me, or if you love me for what you think I can give you." David stood up abruptly. "I don't like these kinds of conversations. They're not productive." "They're not productive or they're not comfortable?" "Both. I'm going to take a shower." As David walked toward the bathroom, Simone felt something settle in her chest like a stone. She finally had her answer, even though he hadn't actually given her one. His silence spoke louder than any words could have. That night, she lay awake long after David had fallen asleep, staring at the ceiling and thinking about Carmen's engagement, about Jessica's baby baptism, about all the life events that other people seemed to navigate with joy rather than anxiety. Maybe the problem wasn't that she couldn't get pregnant. Maybe the problem was that she was trying to get pregnant with the wrong person. The thought was terrifying and liberating at the same time. For the first time in months, Simone began to imagine what her life might look like if she stopped trying to fix her marriage and started trying to save herself instead. 2 months earlier. The text message arrived at 2:17 p.m. on a Thursday while Simone was working on a logo design for a local nonprofit. The message was from her doctor's office. "Please call to discuss your recent lab results." Simone's heart stopped. She'd had routine blood work done the week before during her annual physical. Nothing related to fertility, just standard wellness checks. But any message from a doctor's office sent her into immediate anxiety mode. She called immediately, her hands shaking as she dialed. "Mrs. Parker? This is Dr. Martinez's office. The doctor wanted to discuss some irregularities in your recent blood work." "What kind of irregularities?" Simone managed to ask. Nothing serious, but your thyroid levels are slightly elevated. Dr. Martinez would like to see you next week to discuss treatment options and how this might be affecting other aspects of your health. After hanging up, Simone immediately Googled thyroid problems and fertility. What she found made her heart race with a mixture of hope and frustration. Thyroid dysfunction was a common cause of fertility issues, one that was easily treatable with medication. This could be the answer they'd been looking for. This could be why it had taken so long to conceive. For the first time in months, Simone felt genuinely excited to talk to David about something medical. This wasn't another invasive test or expensive procedure. This was a simple problem with a simple solution. She spent the rest of the afternoon researching, reading success stories from women who'd gotten pregnant within months of starting thyroid medication. By the time David got home, she was practically vibrating with hope. "David, I have amazing news," she said, meeting him at the door. He looked tired, like he always did these days, and her enthusiasm seemed to make him even wearier. "What's up?" "Dr. Martinez called about my blood work. My thyroid levels are off and that can cause fertility problems. But it's totally treatable. I could be on medication and we could be pregnant within a few months." She expected excitement, relief, joy. Instead, David's face went completely blank. "Your thyroid," he said flatly. "Yes. Makes so much sense. I've been tired lately and my hair's been a little thinner, and apparently those are all symptoms. This could be why we've been having trouble." David set down his briefcase and loosened his tie. "So now it's your thyroid." The tone of his voice made Simone's excitement falter. "What do you mean?" "I mean, last month it was your stress levels. Before that, it was your diet. Before that, you thought maybe you weren't ovulating regularly. There's always something, Simone. But this is real. This is medical. The doctor says. The doctor says a lot of things. Doctors want to find problems to solve because that's how they make money." Simone stared at her husband. "Are you seriously suggesting that my doctor is lying about my blood work?" "I'm suggesting that you're so desperate to find a medical explanation for everything that you'll latch onto anything that gives you hope." The words hit her like a physical blow. "I'm desperate." "Yes, you are. You're desperate and obsessive, and it's changing you into someone I barely recognize." Simone felt tears building behind her eyes, but she forced herself to stay calm. "David, this is a simple blood test showing that my thyroid isn't functioning properly. That's not desperation, that's medical fact. And what happens when you take the thyroid medication and still don't get pregnant? What's the next thing you'll blame? What's the next doctor you'll want to see? Why are you so determined to believe that nothing will help us? Because I've watched you torture yourself for 2 years chasing one solution after another, and nothing has worked. Nothing has worked because you won't let us actually try anything. You refuse to get tested, you won't consider fertility treatments, you won't even take my medical issues seriously." David's face flushed. "I won't enable your obsession anymore, Simone. I'm tired of our entire life revolving around your ovulation schedule and doctor's appointments and medical theories." "Our entire life? David, when was the last time we talked about anything else? When was the last time you asked about my work or my friends, or how I'm feeling about anything other than getting pregnant? When was the last time you cared about anything other than getting pregnant?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Simone realized with dawning horror that she couldn't remember the last time she talked enthusiastically about her graphic design work, or planned a fun outing with Carmen, or even watched a movie without calculating where she was in her cycle. "Maybe," she said slowly, "I became obsessed with getting pregnant because you made it clear that's all I'm good for." David's eyes flashed. "That's not fair. Isn't it? When was the last time you complimented me on anything other than my potential as a mother? When was the last time you seemed proud of my work or my creativity or my intelligence?" "Simone, you're being dramatic." "Am I? Because from where I'm standing, it feels like the only value I have in this marriage is my uterus. And since that's not working the way you want it to, I'm basically worthless to you." "That's not true." "Then prove it. Take interest in my life beyond my fertility. Support me when I find medical answers. Act like you actually want to solve our problems instead of just blaming me for them." David was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was cold and distant. "I think we should take a break from trying to have kids. Just for a while. This whole thing has gotten out of hand." Simone felt something crack inside her chest. A break from trying to have the family we both said we wanted? A break from the obsession. The constant focus on pregnancy and fertility and medical problems. "I want my wife back." "Your wife is right here, David. She's always been here. But she comes with hopes and dreams and medical needs, And if you can't handle that, then maybe the problem isn't her obsession. That night, they ate dinner in silence. David watched TV while Simone researched thyroid medication and fertility success stories on her laptop. They went to bed without speaking, lying on opposite sides of their queen-size bed like strangers. The next morning, David left for work without saying goodbye. Simone called and made an appointment with Dr. Martinez for the following week, then called Carmen to ask if she could come over. "You look terrible," Carmen said bluntly when she arrived with coffee and pastries. "What's going on?" Simone told her about the thyroid diagnosis and David's reaction. As she talked, she watched her friend's face grow increasingly angry. "He called you desperate and obsessive for following up on legitimate medical concerns?" Carmen's voice was tight with controlled fury. "He says I've changed into someone he doesn't recognize." "Good. You should change. You should grow and learn and fight for what you want. That's what healthy people do." Carmen sat down on the couch next to Simone. "Can I ask you something? And I want you to really think about the answer." "Okay. If you got pregnant tomorrow, do you think that would fix your marriage?" Simone was quiet for a long time. "No," she said finally. "I don't think it would. I think it would just give us something else to disagree about." "And if you never get pregnant, do you think David will stay married to you?" That question was even harder to answer, because Simone was starting to suspect she already knew the truth. "No," she whispered. "I don't think he will." "Then what are you fighting for?" The question followed Simone for the rest of the weekend. What was she fighting for? A baby with a man who couldn't support her through medical challenges? A marriage with someone who saw her struggles as character flaws? A future with a partner who only valued her for one specific function? On Monday morning, she called Dr. Martinez's office and scheduled her appointment. Then she did something she'd never done before. She called David's office and left a message with his assistant. "Please tell him I'm starting thyroid treatment this week, and I'd appreciate his support. If he can't give me that, then we need to have a serious conversation about our marriage." David didn't call her back that day, or the next day, or the day after that. By Thursday, Simone had her answer. She called Carmen that evening. "I think I need to talk to a lawyer," she said. Carmen was quiet for a moment. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure that I can't keep living like this. I'm sure that I deserve a partner who supports me instead of tears me down. And I'm sure that David has already checked out of this marriage, he just hasn't admitted it yet. If you're certain, then you know I'll help you however I can." "I'm not certain about much these days," Simone said. "But I'm certain that I can't keep trying to save a marriage with someone who doesn't want to save it with me." That night, David came home late and went straight to bed without asking about her day or her doctor's appointment. As Simone listened to his even breathing next to her, she realized that she wasn't sad anymore. She was done. Present day 2 weeks before court. Simone stood in front of the bathroom mirror, her hand resting on the gentle curve of her belly. At almost 8 months pregnant, she looked radiant in a way she'd never experienced. During her marriage to David, her skin glowed, her hair was thick and healthy, and her eyes held a peace that had been missing for years. "Good morning, little one," she whispered to her reflection, smiling as the baby responded with a strong kick. "Today we're going to the lawyer's office to finalize some paperwork, and then we're going to have lunch with Grandma Ruth." The divorce proceedings had been surprisingly smooth, mainly because David had been eager to get them over with. He'd waived his right to any of her business assets, hadn't contested the division of their minimal shared property, and had agreed to pay temporary spousal support for 6 months while Simone rebuilt her life. What he didn't know, what nobody except Carmen, Ruth, and Isaiah knew, was that Simone didn't need his support anymore. Her graphic design business had exploded in the past few months, with several major Atlanta corporations hiring her for their branding needs. She'd moved into a beautiful one-bedroom apartment in Virginia Highland and had been blissfully happy living alone for the first time in years. Well, not exactly alone anymore. Her phone buzzed with a text from Isaiah. "How are my 2 favorite people doing this morning?" Simone smiled as she typed back, "We're perfect. See you for lunch? Wouldn't miss it. Love you both." Isaiah Thompson had entered her life 6 months ago in the most unexpected way. Simone had been at Piedmont Hospital for a routine ultrasound when she'd gotten dizzy and lightheaded in the waiting room. A tall, handsome man in scrubs had helped her to a chair, brought her water, and stayed with her until she felt better. "I'm Isaiah," he'd said, his voice gentle and concerned. "I'm a pediatric nurse here. Are you okay?" "I'm fine," she'd replied, embarrassed. "Just got a little woozy. I'm supposed to have an ultrasound in a few minutes." "First baby?" "Yes. And I'm doing this alone, which is new for me." Isaiah had smiled. Some of the strongest women I know are doing it alone. And from what I can see, you're definitely strong enough. That casual encounter had led to coffee dates, then dinner dates, then long walks through the city where they talked about everything except her pending divorce and his previous relationship with a woman who'd wanted different things from life. Isaiah was everything David wasn't. He was patient, supportive, genuinely interested in her work and her dreams. When she told him about her thyroid treatment and how much better she'd been feeling, he'd asked thoughtful questions and celebrated her improved energy levels. When she'd shared her fears about single motherhood, he'd listened without trying to fix everything and had offered practical support without making her feel like a burden. I've never been with a pregnant woman before, he'd admitted after they'd been seeing each other for 2 months. But I've never been happier in my life. Even though it's not your baby? Especially because you're trusting me to be part of this journey, he'd said. That means everything to me. Now, as Simone got dressed for her day, she marveled at how different her life looked compared to 6 months ago. She'd gone from feeling like a failure as a woman to feeling like the most powerful version of herself she'd ever been. The thyroid medication had worked exactly as Dr. Martinez had predicted. Within 3 months of starting treatment, Simone had felt more energetic, her hair had gotten thicker, and apparently her fertility had been restored. The pregnancy had been a complete surprise. A beautiful, perfect surprise that had happened just as she was finally learning to love herself again. Knock knock. Carmen's voice came through the apartment door. Are you ready for Operation Finalize this divorce? Simone opened the door to find her best friend holding 2 cups of coffee and a bag of pregnancy-safe pastries from their favorite bakery. You know I can't have caffeine, Simone laughed. Decaf, obviously. I'm not trying to harm my godchild. Carmen settled onto the couch and looked around Simone's apartment admiringly. I still can't believe how perfect this place is. The apartment was everything Simone had dreamed of. High ceilings, exposed brick walls, huge windows that let in tons of natural light. She decorated it with her own artwork and had set up a perfect home office where her business was thriving. The nursery was nearly finished, decorated in soft yellows and greens with a beautiful crib that Isaiah had insisted on buying. I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, Simone admitted. Like, how can I be this happy after everything that happened? Because you deserve to be happy. And because you did the hard work of choosing yourself over a marriage that was slowly killing your spirit. Sometimes I feel guilty about how easy it's been to move on. Carmen gave her a serious look. Don't. You spent 2 years trying to save that marriage while David did nothing but tear you down. You earned this happiness. They spent the morning at Carmen's law office, reviewing the final divorce paperwork. Everything was in order for the court date in 2 weeks. David had signed everything without contest, probably eager to close this chapter of his life and move on to finding the fertile wife he'd always wanted. Are you nervous about seeing him in court? Carmen asked as they wrapped up. Not nervous exactly. More like closure-seeking, I guess. I want him to see that I'm okay. Better than okay. Well, you're definitely going to accomplish that goal. That afternoon, Simone met her mother and Isaiah for lunch at Mary Mac's Tea Room, a beloved Atlanta institution that served the kind of Southern comfort food Ruth had raised her on. You look beautiful, baby girl, Ruth said, hugging her daughter carefully. Pregnancy suits you. Thank you, Mama. I feel beautiful. Isaiah stood up as they approached the table, kissing Simone gently and pulling out her chair. The gesture was so natural, so respectful, that Simone felt a rush of gratitude for how different her life was now. How was the lawyer meeting? Isaiah asked as they looked over their menus. Good. Everything's ready for next week. It's really happening. Ruth reached across the table and took her daughter's hand. How are you feeling about all of it? Honestly, I feel free. Like I'm finally becoming the person I was always supposed to be. And what person is that? Isaiah asked with a smile. Someone who knows her worth. Someone who doesn't accept less than she deserves. Someone who can create a beautiful life for herself and her child, with or without a man. With, Isaiah said firmly. Definitely with. Simone laughed. We'll see how you feel when you're dealing with 3 a.m. feedings and diaper blowouts. I can't wait, he said, and the sincerity in his voice made Simone's heart skip. After lunch, Ruth went back to her hotel. She was staying in town for a few days to help with baby preparations, and Isaiah walked Simone back to her apartment. Can I ask you something? He said as they reached her building. Always. Do you ever regret how things happened? The timing, I mean. Meeting me while you were still married, getting pregnant during the divorce. Simone considered the question. It was true that the timing had been complicated. She'd met Isaiah before her divorce was final, and the pregnancy had happened while she was technically still married to David. But she'd been separated for months, living independently, and David had made it clear he wanted nothing to do with reconciliation. "I don't regret anything," she said finally. "I think everything happened exactly when it was supposed to. The thyroid treatment, meeting you, getting pregnant, finding the strength to leave David, it all had to happen in that order for me to be ready for this life." "I love you," Isaiah said, cupping her face in his hands. "I love you, and I love this baby, and I love the family we're building together." "I love you too." That evening, as Simone worked on a logo design for a new client, she felt the baby moving actively inside her. She paused in her work to place both hands on her belly, marveling at the miracle growing inside her. For 2 years she tried desperately to get pregnant with David, begging her body to cooperate, blaming herself when it didn't happen. Now, with proper medical care and a supportive partner, pregnancy had happened naturally and beautifully. The difference wasn't medical, it was emotional. Her body had been waiting for her to be in a place where she felt safe, loved, and valued for more than her reproductive capabilities. 2 weeks, little one," she whispered. 2 weeks until we're officially free to start our new life." As if in response, the baby gave her the strongest kick yet, right under her ribs. "I know," Simone laughed. "You're ready to meet your daddy Isaiah and your grandma Ruth and your auntie Carmen. We're all ready to meet you too." Outside her window, Atlanta sparkled in the evening light. Somewhere across the city, David was probably having dinner alone or maybe with whatever woman he'd moved on to. Either way, it didn't matter to Simone anymore. She had everything she'd ever wanted: a thriving business, a supportive partner, a healthy pregnancy, and most importantly, a deep sense of her own worth that nobody could ever take away from her again. The girl who had sat on her bathroom floor 2 years ago, crying over negative pregnancy tests while her husband grew increasingly cold and distant, felt like a different person entirely. That girl had been strong, but she hadn't known it yet. This woman, this mother-to-be, successful businesswoman, beloved partner, knew exactly how powerful she was. And in 2 weeks she was going to walk into that courtroom and show everyone just how far she'd come. The day after court, Simone woke up in Isaiah's arms, sunlight streaming through the bedroom windows of his townhouse in Grant Park. For a moment she lay still, processing the events of the previous day. The shock on David's face, the finalized divorce papers, the way Isaiah had held her hand as they walked out of the courthouse as a free woman. "Good morning, beautiful." Isaiah's voice was husky with sleep. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I have in years," she said honestly, turning in his arms to face him. "I think I'm still processing everything." "Want to talk about it?" This was what she loved most about Isaiah. His willingness to listen, to hold space for her feelings without trying to fix or dismiss them. So different from David, who had always seemed uncomfortable with emotional conversations. "I keep thinking about the look on his face," she admitted. "David's. He seems so broken." Isaiah stroked her hair gently. "Do you feel bad for him?" "I feel bad for the version of us that could have been. If he'd been willing to work with me instead of against me. If he'd seen our fertility struggles as something we could tackle together instead of something that was my fault." "But you don't regret leaving?" "God, no." Simone placed her hand on her belly, feeling the baby's morning movements. "Look what would have missed out on if I'd stayed." They made breakfast together in Isaiah's kitchen. He scrambled eggs while she cut up fresh fruit, moving around each other with the easy familiarity of two people who'd found their rhythm together. Isaiah had been staying at her apartment most nights, but they'd been talking about moving in together officially after the baby was born. "So," Isaiah said as they sat down to eat, "your mama wants to take us out to celebrate tonight. She made reservations at some fancy place in Buckhead. She's been planning this divorce celebration dinner for weeks." Simone laughed. "I think she's more excited about me being free than I am. She loves you. And she wants you to be happy. I'm happy. Happier than I ever thought possible." Simone's phone buzzed with a text from Carmen. "How are you feeling today, free woman?" She typed back, "Like I can breathe again." Carmen responded immediately, "Good. Because I have news. David's lawyer called mine this morning." Simone frowned. "About what?" "Everything was finalized yesterday. He wants to talk to you. Apparently David is struggling to process and wants closure." Simone showed the text to Isaiah, who raised his eyebrows. "What do you want to do?" "I don't know. Part of me is curious about what he could possibly want to say. But part of me thinks the best closure is no contact at all. What does your gut tell you?" Simone thought about it as she finished her breakfast. Her gut told her that David was probably panicking, realizing what he'd lost, and looking for some way to make himself feel better about his choices. But she also wondered if there was something he needed to say that might help both of them move forward cleanly. "I think I want to hear him out," she said finally. "But only if Carmen is there and only in a public place. And you're okay with it?" "I'm okay with whatever you need," Isaiah said. "I trust you completely." That afternoon, Carmen arranged for David to meet them at a coffee shop in Midtown. Neutral territory, public, with Carmen as a buffer. Simone chose her outfit carefully, a flowing maternity dress that accentuated her pregnancy glow, comfortable flats, her hair styled in the natural locks that she'd grown to love during her separation. She looked confident, healthy, and unmistakably happy, which was exactly the image she wanted to project. David was already there when she arrived, sitting alone at a corner table. He looked terrible, like he hadn't slept in weeks. His usually neat appearance was disheveled, his shirt wrinkled, his eyes red-rimmed with dark circles underneath. "Simone," he stood up as she approached, his eyes immediately going to her belly. Wow. You look amazing." "Thank you." She sat down across from him, with Carmen taking the chair beside her. "Carmen says you wanted to talk." David's hands were shaking slightly as he reached for his coffee cup. "I've been thinking a lot since yesterday. About everything. About us." "Okay. I was wrong, Simone. About so many things. I was wrong to blame you for our fertility problems. I was wrong to refuse to get tested. I was wrong to make you feel like you weren't enough just as you are." Simone waited for him to continue, her expression neutral. "I saw you yesterday, pregnant and glowing and obviously happy, and I realized that the problem was never you. It was me. My impatience, my selfishness, my need to control everything instead of just supporting you." "David, please let me finish. I need to say this." David's voice cracked slightly. "I threw away the best thing that ever happened to me because I was too proud and too stupid to admit that I might be part of the problem. And now you're having the baby we always wanted with someone else." Simone felt a flicker of sympathy for him, but it was tempered by her memory of all the times he'd made her feel worthless and broken. "The baby we always wanted," she said quietly, "was supposed to be created by two people who loved and supported each other. That's not what we had, David. But it could have been. If I'd been different. If I'd been better. Maybe. But you weren't. And I can't live my life based on who you might have become someday." David leaned forward, desperation clear in his eyes. "Is it too late? Could we try again? I could get tested now. I could support you. I could be the husband you deserved." Carmen shifted in her seat, clearly uncomfortable with where the conversation was heading. But Simone felt completely calm, completely certain of her response. "David, yesterday a judge signed papers that legally ended our marriage. I'm 8 months pregnant with another man's child. I'm building a life with someone who has never made me feel like I had to earn his love. It's not just too late, it's a completely different universe. But if circumstances were different, we might have had a different story. But this is the story we have. This is the story I chose when I chose to save myself instead of trying to save us." David's face crumpled. "I lost you." "Yes, you did. But David, you lost me long before yesterday. You lost me the first time you made me feel ashamed of wanting answers about my fertility. You lost me when you refused to see doctors together. You lost me when you started treating me like a broken appliance instead of your wife." I know all of that now." "Then you understand why there's no going back." They sat in silence for a few minutes. David stared into his coffee cup while Simone watched people walking by on the busy Atlanta street. Normal people living their normal lives, unencumbered by the weight of failed marriages and missed chances. "Are you happy?" David asked finally. "Very happy." Does he treat you well?" "He treats me like a partner. Like someone he's grateful to share his life with." David nodded slowly. "Good. That's what you deserve." "It is what I deserve. I just wish I'd known that sooner. I'm sorry, Simone. For all of it. For making you feel like you weren't enough. For wasting the time we had together. For not being the man you needed. I accept your apology. And I hope you find happiness, David. I hope you find someone you can love properly, and I hope you become the kind of partner who deserves love in return. Do you think, could you ever forgive me?" Simone considered the question. Forgiveness had been something she'd wrestled with throughout their separation and divorce proceedings. Not because David had asked for it, he hadn't until now, but because carrying anger was exhausting. "I already have forgiven you," she said. "For my own peace, not for yours. But forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. It just means I'm not going to let what happened between us poison my future. David's eyes filled with tears. I don't know how to live with what I've done. You live with it by learning from it. By being better in your next relationship. By getting therapy and figuring out why you were so afraid of vulnerability that you chose cruelty instead. I am seeing a therapist, he said quietly. Started last month. Good. That's really good, David. As they prepared to leave, David reached across the table as if to touch her hand, then stopped himself. Could I say something to the baby? Simone felt Carmen tense beside her, but after a moment she nodded. David looked down at her belly, his voice barely a whisper. I'm sorry I won't be your daddy, little one. But your mama is the strongest, most amazing woman in the world, and she's going to love you so much. And the man she chose to be your father is going to be better than I ever could have been. It was the most selfless thing Simone had ever heard David say. As they left the coffee shop, Carmen walked Simone to her car. How are you feeling? Sad for him. Grateful for me. Ready to move forward completely. No regrets about hearing him out? None. I think I needed to see that he finally understands what he lost. Not so I could gloat, but so I could close that chapter knowing he learned something. That evening, at the fancy restaurant Ruth had chosen for their celebration dinner, Simone sat between her mother and Isaiah, feeling surrounded by love. Ruth raised her glass of wine, Simone had sparkling cider, for a toast. To my daughter, Ruth said, her voice thick with pride, who had the courage to choose herself when no one else would. To new beginnings, new love, and new life. To the strongest woman I know, Isaiah added, who taught me what real partnership looks like. To all of us, Simone said, placing her hand on her belly, and to the family we're creating together. Not the family I thought I wanted, but the family I was actually meant to have. As they clinked glasses, Simone felt the baby kick strongly as if in agreement. Outside the restaurant windows, Atlanta glittered in the night. Somewhere in the city, David was probably going home to an empty apartment, facing the consequences of his choices. Simone felt compassion for him, but no regret about her own path. Tomorrow she would wake up in Isaiah's arms, work on her thriving business, and continue preparing for the arrival of her daughter. They'd found out the gender the week before. She would live the life she'd built for herself, not in reaction to David's limitations, but in response to her own dreams and desires. The girl who had sat on a bathroom floor 2 years ago, staring at negative pregnancy tests and believing she was broken, was truly gone. In her place was a woman who knew her worth, claimed her happiness, and created her own miracles. 1 month later. The contractions started at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in late spring. Simone woke up in Isaiah's bed with a sharp pain across her abdomen, different from the Braxton Hicks contractions she'd been experiencing for weeks. Isaiah, she whispered, shaking his shoulder gently. I think it's time. He was instantly alert, his nursing training kicking in. How far apart are they? This was the first one. But it was, wow, definitely different. Over the next 2 hours, they timed contractions while Simone took a warm shower and Isaiah packed their hospital bag. Carmen was on standby to drive them when the time came, and Ruth was already at the hospital where she'd been camping out for 3 days, convinced her granddaughter would arrive early. You're handling this like a champion, Isaiah said as they waded through another contraction. He rubbed her back in slow circles the way they'd practiced in their birthing class. I feel strong, Simone said, surprised by her own calmness. Ready. By 6 a.m. the contractions were 5 minutes apart and definitely getting stronger. Carmen arrived with coffee for Isaiah and encouraging words for Simone. Time to meet your daughter, she said, helping Simone into the car. The drive to Piedmont Hospital took 15 minutes through early morning Atlanta traffic. Simone breathed through 2 more contractions in the back seat, holding Isaiah's hand and focusing on the visualization techniques their doula had taught them. Ruth was waiting in the maternity ward lobby, having apparently been there since 4 a.m., just in case. How's my baby girl? She asked, hugging Simone carefully. About to have her own baby girl, Simone laughed, then caught her breath as another contraction hit. The next 8 hours were a blur of hospital rooms, medical professionals, and the gradual intensification of labor. Isaiah never left her side, feeding her ice chips, helping her change positions, reminding her how strong and capable she was. Dr. Martinez arrived around 2 p.m. to check Simone's progress. You're doing beautifully, she said with a warm smile. Baby's in perfect position, your vitals are excellent, and you're already at 8 centimeters. This little girl is ready to meet the world. I can't wait to meet her, Simone said through gritted teeth as another contraction peaked. At 4:32 p.m., After one final push that seemed to take every ounce of strength Simone had ever possessed, baby Hope Ruth Thompson entered the world with a loud, healthy cry. "She's perfect," Dr. Martinez announced, placing the squirming, pink baby on Simone's chest. "Absolutely perfect." Simone looked down at her daughter, their daughter, and felt her heart explode with a love so fierce it took her breath away. Hope had a head full of dark, curly hair, her father's dark eyes, Isaiah was already claiming credit, and the most beautiful little face Simone had ever seen. "Hi, baby girl," she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I'm your mama. I love you so much." Isaiah was crying too, his hand gentle on Hope's tiny back. "She's incredible, Simone. Look what you did. Look what we made together." Ruth stood at the foot of the bed, openly weeping with joy. "She's got your chin, baby girl. And your stubborn streak, if that cry is any indication." Carmen, who had been documenting everything with her camera, wiped her eyes behind her phone. "She's the most beautiful baby I've ever seen." Over the next few hours, a steady stream of visitors came to meet Hope. Isaiah's parents drove down from Athens, bringing flowers and handmade blankets. Simone's design clients sent elaborate gift baskets. Even some of David's family members, his sister and mother, sent cards congratulating Simone on her new daughter. But it was that first hour, when it was just Simone, Isaiah, and Hope in the quiet hospital room, that felt most precious. Isaiah had pulled his chair as close to the bed as possible, his arm around Simone's shoulders while she nursed Hope for the first time. "I can't believe she's really here," Simone said, marveling at how perfectly Hope latched on, how natural everything felt. "I can't believe how lucky I am," Isaiah replied. "6 months ago, I was a single guy who thought he'd probably never have kids. Now I have a daughter and the most amazing partner in the world. You know she's going to call you daddy, right? She won't know you're not her biological father. I don't want her to know, not unless someday she asks. As far as I'm concerned, I am her father in every way that matters." That evening, after Ruth and Carmen had gone back to their respective homes and Isaiah's parents had driven back to Athens, the three of them settled into their routine. Hope slept in the bassinet next to the bed while Simone and Isaiah talked quietly about their plans for when they went home. "I've been thinking," Isaiah said, "about us moving in together officially. Maybe we should start looking for a house. Something with a yard where Hope can play when she gets bigger." "I'd like that," Simone said. "Somewhere we can build our life together. All three of us. I love you so much, Simone. And I love our daughter. I want to spend the rest of my life making sure you both know how cherished you are. I love you too. And Isaiah, thank you for showing me what real love looks like. What partnership actually means." As they drifted off to sleep in the hospital bed, Isaiah in the uncomfortable chair beside her, one hand resting on Hope's bassinet, Simone reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. 2 years ago, she'd been married to a man who made her feel broken and worthless, desperate for a baby she couldn't conceive, slowly losing herself in the process of trying to save a marriage that was already over. Tonight, she was the mother of a healthy, beautiful daughter, partner to a man who treated her like a queen, and the owner of a successful business that fulfilled her creatively and financially. The path from there to here hadn't been easy. The divorce had been emotionally draining, even though it was ultimately liberating. Starting over at 28 had been scary, even though she'd ended up building something better than what she'd left behind. Learning to trust love again had been terrifying, even though Isaiah had proven himself worthy of that trust every single day. But looking at Hope's peaceful face in the dim hospital light, Simone knew that every difficult step had been worth it. Every moment of uncertainty, every scary decision, every leap of faith had led to this perfect, precious life sleeping beside her. "Thank you," she whispered to the universe, to God, to whatever force had guided her through the darkness and into this beautiful light. Hope stirred slightly in her sleep, as if she'd heard her mother's gratitude and wanted to acknowledge it with a tiny sigh of contentment. 3 days later, they brought Hope home to Isaiah's townhouse, which they'd already started transforming into their family home. The nursery was perfect, decorated in soft yellows and greens with handmade quilts from Ruth and artwork that Simone had created during her pregnancy. "Welcome home, baby girl," Simone said as she carried Hope across the threshold. "This is where your story really begins." Outside, Atlanta hummed with its usual energy, traffic and construction and millions of people living their individual lives. But inside their home, time seemed suspended in the golden glow of new parenthood. Simone settled into the rocking chair Isaiah had bought, positioning Hope for another feeding. Through the window, she could see the small garden Isaiah had been tending, full of flowers that would bloom throughout Hope's first year of life. Everything about this moment felt intentional, chosen, blessed. As Hope nursed, Simone thought about David, wondered briefly if he ever thought about the baby he'd never meet. She felt no anger toward him anymore, only a kind of distant sadness for what he'd missed by being too proud to grow. But her sadness was quickly replaced by overwhelming gratitude for what she'd gained by being brave enough to choose herself, her health, her happiness, and ultimately, this perfect love story that was just beginning. Hope finished eating and fell asleep against Simone's chest, her tiny hand curled around her mother's finger. In the kitchen, Isaiah was making dinner, probably something nourishing and delicious that would help Simone's body heal and recover. This was her life now. Not the life she'd planned, but the life she'd been brave enough to claim. And it was absolutely perfect. 6 months later. Hope's laughter filled the sunny backyard of the house they'd bought in Grant Park, a charming 1920s bungalow with hardwood floors and a big front porch. At 6 months old, she was sitting up on her own, grabbing at everything within reach, and had just discovered the joy of splashing in the small kiddie pool Isaiah had set up under the oak tree. "She's going to be walking before we know it," Ruth said from her lawn chair, where she was watching her granddaughter with obvious adoration. Ruth had moved to Atlanta permanently last month, buying a small condo 15 minutes away so she could be nearby without crowding the young family. "Don't rush it, Mama," Simone laughed. "I'm not ready for her to be mobile yet." Carmen emerged from the house carrying a tray of iced tea and the mail she'd brought in. "You got something interesting today," she said, handing Simone an envelope. The return address made Simone's heart skip. David Parker. She hadn't heard from him since their conversation at the coffee shop nearly 8 months ago. "What is it?" Isaiah asked, settling down beside her on the blanket where they were having their Saturday afternoon picnic. "A letter from David." Simone turned the envelope over in her hands, curious but not anxious. Whatever David had to say, it couldn't touch the happiness she'd built. "Do you want to read it?" Isaiah asked. "Or would you rather just throw it away?" "I'm curious," she admitted. "But only if you're comfortable with it." "I'm comfortable. You can handle whatever it says and I trust you completely." Simone opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper with David's familiar handwriting and a small photograph. "Simone, I hope you don't mind me writing to you. Carmen gave my lawyer your address and I wanted to share something with you. I'm getting married next month. Her name is Jennifer and she's an elementary school teacher. We met in therapy, yes, I'm still going, and she's been incredibly patient with me as I've worked through everything that happened with us. I wanted you to know because Jennifer is pregnant. We found out last month, and the baby is due in February. I know this might be strange to hear, but I needed you to know that I finally understand what you were trying to tell me about partnership and support." When Jennifer mentioned wanting to see a fertility specialist just to make sure everything was okay, she's 34 and had some concerns, I didn't hesitate to go with her. I got tested too without being asked. And Simone, the test showed that I have low sperm count and motility issues. The doctor said it could take longer than normal for us to conceive, and we might need some assistance. I can't stop thinking about how I treated you when you suggested similar testing. How I made you feel like you were broken when the problem might have been me all along. How I threw away our marriage because I was too proud and too afraid to admit that I might not be perfect. The irony is that Jennifer got pregnant naturally despite my issues, just like you did with Isaiah. Sometimes the right circumstances, the right support, the right love can make miracles happen. I'm not writing this to ask for anything from you. I just wanted you to know that I finally understand what real love looks like, and I'm sorry it took losing you for me to learn it. I hope you, Isaiah, and your daughter are happy and healthy. You deserved so much better than what I gave you and I'm glad you found it. David. P.S. Jennifer insisted I include this photo. She said any woman who helped teach me how to be a better partner deserves to see that her lessons weren't wasted. Simone looked at the photograph. David and a pretty blonde woman standing in front of what looked like a Christmas tree, both of them smiling genuinely. The woman had her hand on a small but visible baby bump, and David's hand was covering hers. They looked happy together, and David looked different, softer, more open than she remembered him being. "What does it say?" Carmen asked gently. Simone read the letter aloud, watching her family's faces as she shared David's words. When she finished, there was a moment of silence. "How do you feel about it?" Isaiah asked. "Good, actually. Really good. He finally gets it, you know? He understands what went wrong and he's doing better with someone else. That's all I ever wanted, for him to learn and grow and become the kind of partner who deserves love." "And his fertility issues?" Carmen raised an eyebrow. "That must bring up some complicated feelings. Honestly, it makes me sad that we couldn't figure it out together. If he'd been willing to get tested when I suggested it, if he'd been willing to work with me instead of against me, we might have found solutions. Simone paused, watching Hope splash happily in her little pool. But then again, if we'd stayed together and worked through our problems, I never would have met Isaiah. I never would have had Hope. This perfect life we've built wouldn't exist. Ruth nodded approvingly. Sometimes the biggest mistakes lead to the biggest blessings. I'm glad he found someone who can love him properly, Simone continued. And I'm glad he learned how to love properly in return. Everyone deserves that. You're pretty amazing, you know that? Isaiah said, pulling her closer. The fact that you can read a letter like that and feel genuine happiness for your ex-husband. That says everything about who you are. I can feel happy for him because I'm so happy with my own life. It's easy to be generous when you have everything you ever wanted. As if summoned by her words, Hope let out a delighted squeal and began splashing with renewed enthusiasm, soaking herself and everyone within a 3-foot radius. That's what I think about all this grown-up drama, Carmen laughed, reaching over to tickle Hope's feet. Pure joy is the only response that matters. That evening, after Ruth and Carmen had gone home and Hope was tucked into her crib, Simone and Isaiah sat on their front porch swing, watching the sun set over their quiet Atlanta neighborhood. Can I tell you something? Isaiah said, his arm around her shoulders. Always. When you were reading that letter today, I kept thinking about how different things might have been if you'd stayed with David. If he'd gotten his act together and learned to support you properly. Simone looked up at him, surprised. Are you worried about that? Not worried exactly. But curious about how you feel about the road not taken. You want to know if I have regrets? I guess I want to know if you ever wonder what your life would have looked like if David had been the man you needed him to be. Simone was quiet for a moment, really considering the question. It was true that if David had been willing to get tested, if he'd supported her medical needs, if he'd treated her like a true partner, they might have worked through their fertility issues. They might have had children together, stayed married, built a different kind of life. I think, she said finally, that if David had been different, I would have been different too. I would have stayed the version of myself that accepted less than I deserved, that tried to be small enough to fit into someone else's limitations. What do you mean? I mean that my marriage to David taught me what I wouldn't accept anymore. The pain of being with someone who couldn't love me properly pushed me to demand better from life. If he'd been just good enough to keep me from leaving, I might never have discovered how strong I really am. Isaiah kissed the top of her head. And I might never have found you. I might never have experienced what real partnership feels like. I might never have had hope or built my business into what it is now, or learned to trust my own instincts about what makes me happy. So no regrets? Not a single one. David needed to be exactly who he was so that I could become exactly who I am. His limitations freed me to discover my own possibilities. They rocked gently on the swing, listening to the sounds of their neighborhood settling into evening, dogs barking, children playing in distant backyards, the soft hum of air conditioners and televisions. I love our life, Simone said eventually. I love it too. I love you, I love Hope, I love this house, I love the family we've created. Even though it's not traditional? Even though Hope isn't biologically yours? Even though we met when my life was kind of a mess. Especially because of all those things. We chose each other, Simone. We chose this family, this love, this life. That makes it more precious, not less. From inside the house came the soft sound of Hope stirring in her crib, making the little murmuring noises that meant she was waking up from her evening nap. Duty calls, Simone said, starting to get up. I'll get her, Isaiah said. You stay here and enjoy the sunset. As Isaiah went inside to tend to Hope, Simone remained on the porch swing, thinking about the strange circular nature of life. 2 years ago, she'd been desperate for a baby, convinced that getting pregnant would solve all her problems. Now she understood that Hope hadn't fixed her life. Hope had been the reward for fixing her life herself. The baby she'd wanted so desperately with David had been about filling a void, proving her worth, satisfying someone else's expectations. The baby she'd conceived with Isaiah had been about celebrating wholeness, sharing joy, creating something beautiful with someone who already thought she was perfect exactly as she was. Isaiah returned with Hope, who was wide awake and ready for her evening playtime. He settled beside Simone on the swing, holding Hope on his lap while she grabbed at the evening light filtering through the tree branches. You know what I was thinking? Simone said. What's that? I want to write David and Jennifer a note. To congratulate them and maybe, I don't know, to thank him for becoming the person he needed to become. That's very generous of you. It's not generous. It's grateful. His mistakes led me to my miracles. The least I can do is acknowledge that he learned from those mistakes. As they sat there, Isaiah, Simone, and Hope, watching their neighborhood transition from day to night, Simone felt the deep satisfaction of a life lived intentionally. Every choice she'd made in the past 2 years, from leaving David to starting her business to opening her heart to Isaiah, had led to this perfect moment. Hope began babbling, her little voice mixing with the evening sounds of Atlanta. In her gibberish, Simone could swear she heard something that sounded almost like "Mama" and "Dada." "Did you hear that?" Isaiah asked excitedly. "I think she's trying to say Dada." "I think she's just making sounds," Simone laughed. "But we can pretend she's a genius, baby, if it makes you happy." "Everything about this makes me happy," Isaiah said, bouncing Hope gently on his knee. "Everything about this life we've built makes me happy." As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky above Atlanta, Simone felt a deep sense of completion. Not the kind of completion that meant she was finished growing or changing, but the kind that meant she was finally fully herself. The broken woman who had sat on her bathroom floor 2 years ago, staring at negative pregnancy tests and believing she wasn't enough, had transformed into someone who knew her own worth, created her own happiness, and built her own miracles. And this was just the beginning of the story. 1 year later, the morning light streamed through the windows of Simone's expanded home office, where she was putting the finishing touches on a major branding project for a national nonprofit organization. At 1 year old, Hope was toddling around the baby-proof space, babbling happily to herself as she played with her toys. "Mama, Mama," Hope called out, having perfected that particular word over the past month. She held up a colorful block, proud of her achievement. "That's beautiful, baby girl," Simone said, saving her work and scooping Hope into her lap. "Are you helping Mama work today?" Hope giggled and reached for the computer keyboard, fascinated by all the buttons. Simone had learned to save her work frequently during these collaborative sessions. The business had grown beyond Simone's wildest expectations. What had started as a way to support herself during the divorce had evolved into a thriving design firm with several regular clients and a waiting list for new projects. She'd even hired Carmen's younger sister Maria as a part-time assistant to help manage the administrative side of things. "Good morning, beautiful girls," Isaiah's voice came from the doorway. He was already dressed for work in his scrubs, holding 2 cups of coffee and looking as happy as ever. "Dada." Hope practically launched herself from Simone's lap toward Isaiah, who caught her expertly. "There's my girl," he laughed, spinning her around. "Are you being a good helper for Mama?" "The best helper," Simone said, accepting her coffee gratefully, "though her keyboard skills need some work." Isaiah had been officially Hope's father in every way that mattered since the day she was born, and last month they'd made it legal. The adoption papers were finalized on Hope's first birthday, making their family official in the eyes of the law as well as in their hearts. "I have news," Isaiah said, settling Hope on his hip. "Dr. Williams approached me yesterday about applying for the nurse practitioner program at Emory. He thinks I'd be a great candidate, and the pediatric NP program is exactly what I've been thinking about." "Isaiah, that's amazing. Do you want to do it?" "I do." "It would mean 2 years of school, mostly evenings and weekends. But it would also mean better hours and more opportunities to really make a difference in kids' lives." "Then you should absolutely do it. We can make it work." "Are you sure?" "It would mean less income while I'm in school, more childcare responsibilities for you." Simone stood up and wrapped her arms around both of them. "We're a team, remember? Your dreams are my dreams. If this is what you want, then we'll figure out how to make it happen." This was what real partnership looked like, Simone reflected. 2 people supporting each other's growth and dreams, making decisions together, sharing both responsibilities and rewards. The front door opened, followed by Ruth's familiar voice. "Where are my babies?" "In here, Mama," Simone called back. Ruth appeared in the office doorway, already reaching for Hope. At 18 months, Hope had definitely chosen her grandmother as her favorite person, much to everyone's amusement. "There's my sweet girl," Ruth cooed, taking Hope from Isaiah. "Grandma brought you something special." Ruth had embraced her role as grandmother with enthusiasm, spoiling Hope thoroughly and providing invaluable support to Simone and Isaiah as they navigated new parenthood while building their careers. "What's the special something today?" Simone asked. "A new book about a little girl who builds castles out of blocks. I thought Miss Hope might relate to that." As Ruth settled into the rocking chair with Hope and the new book, Simone's phone buzzed with a text from Carmen. "Check your email. Now." Simone frowned and pulled up her email on her phone. The message at the top made her gasp. "What is it?" Isaiah asked. "Carmen forwarded me something." "Oh my God." "What?" "It's a birth announcement. David and Jennifer had their baby." The email included a photo of a tiny baby boy with David's features and Jennifer's coloring. The announcement read, "Jackson David Parker, born February 15th, 7 pounds 3 ounces, 20 inches long. Our hearts are full." "How do you feel about that?" Isaiah asked gently. "Happy for them," Simone said, and she meant it. "Really genuinely happy. They look like they're going to be good parents." She thought about the letter David had sent months ago, about how he'd learned to be supportive and present for Jennifer in ways he'd never been able to be for Simone. Everyone deserved that kind of love and partnership, and she was glad David had finally figured out how to give it. "You know what I want to do?" she said suddenly. "What?" "I want to send them something for the baby. A gift from our family to theirs." Isaiah smiled. "That's very you. What kind of gift?" "I was thinking about that beautiful baby blanket your mom made for Hope. Maybe I could commission her to make one for Jackson too. She would love that. And I think it's a beautiful gesture." That afternoon, while Hope napped, Simone worked on a card to accompany the blanket. She found herself thinking about forgiveness, about how it had freed her to build this beautiful life, and about how everyone deserved second chances to get love right. "Dear David and Jennifer, congratulations on the arrival of Jackson. He's beautiful and you both look so happy. I hope you don't mind, but I wanted to send a small gift to welcome him to the world. The blanket is made by Isaiah's mother, who has become like family to me. She makes them with so much love, and I thought Jackson should have one made just for him. David, I'm proud of the man you've become and the father I know you'll be. Jennifer is lucky to have you, and Jackson is lucky to have both of you. Wishing your family all the joy and love in the world. With warm wishes, Simone, Isaiah, and Hope." A week later, Simone received a response. A beautiful card with a photo of Jackson wrapped in the blanket they'd sent, along with a heartfelt note from Jennifer. "Dear Simone, I can't tell you how touched I was by your gift and your note. David has told me about your marriage and how it ended, and he's shared how much he learned from his mistakes. Your kindness to us means more than you know. I hope someday our children might meet and become friends. I think it would be beautiful for them to know that even when love doesn't work out the way we plan, it can still lead to wonderful things for everyone involved. Thank you for helping David become the man he needed to be. Jackson and I are the beneficiaries of that growth, and I will always be grateful. With love and admiration, Jennifer. P.S. David wanted me to tell you that seeing you, Isaiah, and Hope together at the grocery store last month was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. He said you looked like the family you were always meant to be." Simone smiled as she read the letter, feeling a deep sense of completion. The painful chapter of her marriage to David had finally transformed into something beautiful, not reconciliation, but genuine peace and mutual respect. That evening, as they sat down for dinner as a family, Hope in her high chair making a delightful mess with her sweet potato puree, Isaiah reached across the table to take Simone's hand. "I have something I want to say," he announced. "Okay," Simone said, curious about his serious tone. "I know we've talked about marriage in abstract terms, about how we don't need a piece of paper to prove our commitment to each other. Right? But I changed my mind. I want to marry you, Simone. Not because we need to prove anything to anyone else, but because I want to stand in front of our families and friends and make promises to you and Hope. I want to celebrate our love and make it official." Simone felt tears spring to her eyes. "Isaiah, I know you've been married before and I know it ended badly. But this would be different. This would be about joy and partnership and building something beautiful together, not about obligation or expectations or trying to fix each other. Are you proposing to me at the dinner table while our daughter throws sweet potatoes at the wall?" Isaiah laughed. "I guess I am. Is that okay?" "It's perfect. It's absolutely perfect." Simone leaned across the table to kiss him. "Yes, Isaiah. Yes, I want to marry you. I want to be your wife and I want you to be my husband and I want Hope to see what a happy marriage looks like." Hope, apparently sensing the emotional significance of the moment, clapped her hands together and squealed with delight, flinging sweet potato in all directions. "I think she approves," Isaiah grinned. "She definitely approves." That night, after Hope was asleep and they'd cleaned sweet potato off most of the kitchen surfaces, Simone and Isaiah sat on their back porch, planning their future. They wanted a small wedding, maybe in the fall, with just family and close friends. Something joyful and intimate that celebrated the family they'd already created. "I keep thinking about how different this feels from planning my first wedding," Simone mused. "With David, Everything felt like it was about other people's expectations. What kind of dress I should wear, what kind of ceremony would look impressive, what kind of reception would make the right impression. And now I just want to marry you. I don't care if we get married in the backyard wearing jeans, or in a fancy church wearing formal clothes. I just want to promise to love you forever and mean it. For the record, I vote for something in between jeans in the backyard and formal church wedding. Maybe a nice outdoor ceremony with barbecue reception? That sounds perfect. As they sat there planning their wedding and their future, Simone reflected on the incredible journey that had brought her to this moment. 2.5 years ago, she'd been a broken woman in a failing marriage, convinced she was worthless because she couldn't get pregnant. Now she was a successful business owner, the mother of a beautiful daughter, partner to a man who adored her, and surrounded by a chosen family that supported and celebrated her dreams. The path from there to here hadn't been easy. Divorce had been painful, even when it was necessary. Starting over had been scary, even when it was exciting. Learning to trust love again had been terrifying, even when Isaiah proved himself trustworthy every single day. But every difficult step had been worth it. Every moment of uncertainty had led to this certainty. Every ending had made space for a better beginning. Isaiah, she said quietly. Yeah. Thank you for loving me exactly as I am. For never trying to change me or fix me or make me smaller to fit into your life. Thank you for being brave enough to leave a situation that wasn't working so you could find something that does. If you hadn't been willing to save yourself, we never would have found each other. Inside the house, hope stirred in her crib, making the soft sounds that meant she was transitioning between sleep cycles. In a few months, they'd move her to a toddler bed. In a few years, she'd start school. In a few decades, she'd build her own life and family. But tonight, she was their perfect baby girl, sleeping peacefully in the home they'd created together, surrounded by more love than any child could ever need. We should go to bed, Simone said eventually. Tomorrow's going to be a big day. Every day is a big day when you're living the life you actually want, Isaiah replied. As they headed inside, Simone took one last look at their backyard, at the garden Isaiah tended, at the swing set they'd installed for Hope, at the life they'd built together from scratch. This was her happy ending. Not the one she'd originally planned, but the one she'd been brave enough to create for herself. And it was more beautiful than anything she'd ever dared to imagine.